Marcus Chambers, 17-year-old son of tech billionaire Elijah Chambers, boards first class on Transglobal Airlines Flight 847. Flight attendant Veronica Whitehall slaps Marcus after he politely asks for a blanket, wrongfully assuming he doesn't belong in first class. Other passengers gasp in shock, recording the incident. Marcus quietly makes one phone call before takeoff. Police waiting at gate when plane lands, entire crew detained. Marcus watches calmly as Veronica protests. "Do you know what you've done? This is just the beginning." Before we continue this shocking story of discrimination at 30,000 feet, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against racism, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more. Stories of courage in the face of discrimination. Marcus Chambers never expected a simple request for a blanket would explode into a national controversy. At 17, he was already making waves in the tech world with his innovative security app Shield Me, which had attracted millions of downloads and serious attention from Silicon Valley investors. Despite being the son of Elijah Chambers, founder of Chambers Technologies and one of the few black billionaires in America, Marcus had been raised to stay humble and work twice as hard as everyone else. "The world will always see your color before your credentials," his father had repeatedly warned him. This painful lesson had been reinforced countless times throughout Marcus's life. Store security following him through high-end boutiques, being asked if he was lost when entering the executive floor of his father's own building. Even at Stanford's prestigious summer program, where he'd been invited based on his academic achievements, a professor had assumed he was there on a diversity scholarship. Each time, Marcus had followed his father's advice: document everything, stay calm, and respond strategically rather than emotionally. The trip to New York should have been routine. Marcus was scheduled to speak at the Young Innovators Tech Summit, where he would be the youngest presenter. He had packed light, bringing only his laptop, a change of clothes, and the custom-tailored suit his mother insisted he wear for his presentation. He arrived at San Francisco International Airport 3 hours early, breezing through TSA pre-check despite the agent's momentary hesitation when comparing his face to his ID. Boarding the Transglobal Airlines flight to JFK, Marcus had been greeted warmly by two flight attendants who recognized him from a recent Forbes 30 Under 30 feature. "It's an honor to have you aboard, Mr. Chambers," one had said with a genuine smile, directing him to his first-class seat. The initial hospitality made what followed all the more jarring. Veronica Whitehall, the lead flight attendant in first class, had been coldly efficient with the white passengers while completely ignoring Marcus. When she distributed complimentary champagne, her eyes skipped over him as if his seat were empty. When she handed out hot towels, she dropped Marcus's on his tray without making eye contact. Each small slight built on the last, a familiar pattern Marcus had documented in his journal since he was 14. The temperature in the cabin dropped noticeably as the plane reached cruising altitude. Marcus noticed other passengers in first class receiving blankets without having to ask. He waited patiently, assuming Veronica would eventually make her way to him. After 15 minutes of shivering, he pressed the call button. Veronica appeared, visibly annoyed. "Could I please have a blanket?" Marcus asked politely, his voice clear but not confrontational. Veronica's face twisted with contempt. "These blankets are for first-class passengers only," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "I think you're in the wrong seat." "I am in first class," Marcus replied calmly, reaching for his boarding pass. "Seat 2A, here's my ticket." What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the passenger videos, Marcus himself was shocked. Veronica's hand moved in a swift arc, connecting with his cheek with enough force to snap his head to the side. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the cabin like a gunshot. "Don't you dare talk back to me," Veronica hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "I know exactly what kind of person you are." The cabin froze in collective shock. Then came the clicks and whirs of phones being unlocked, cameras being activated. A white businessman across the aisle stood up. That was completely uncalled for. This young man did nothing wrong. As Veronica retreated down the aisle, a female passenger handed Marcus a tissue. A small trickle of blood had formed at the corner of his mouth. "You should sue them for everything they're worth," she whispered. Marcus nodded his thanks but said nothing. Instead, he took out his phone while it still had signal before takeoff. He made one call to his father's legal team, his voice steady as he explained what had happened. He ended the call with a simple, "Yes, I'm okay. Just do what needs to be done." For the remainder of the 5-hour flight, Marcus sat perfectly still, declining meal service and avoiding eye contact with Veronica, who seemed increasingly agitated as whispers spread throughout the cabin. Unknown to Marcus at the time, the videos of the slap had already escaped the airplane's metal cocoon, beaming out through passengers' pre-takeoff internet connections to spread across social media with frightening velocity. By the time Transglobal Airlines Flight 847 touched down at JFK, Boris Black Billionaire slapped was trending nationwide. What would you do if you witnessed such blatant discrimination at 30,000 feet? Would you speak up or stay silent? Type 1 in the comments if you believe Marcus handled the situation perfectly with his calm response, or 2 if you think he should have been more forceful in defending himself. Don't forget to like this video if you're against racial profiling and subscribe to see what happened next in this shocking true story of injustice in America's skies. The scene at JFK Airport unfolded like something from a movie. As passengers disembarked, they were greeted by the sight of airport police standing at the jet bridge, alongside 2 distinguished men in suits, whom Marcus immediately recognized as part of his father's legal team. Captain Reynolds, who had been unaware of the incident until landing, looked bewildered as one of the lawyers presented him with papers. "The entire flight crew needs to remain on board," announced one officer. "We have multiple reports of assault on a minor." Veronica's face drained of color as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. "This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. That boy was disruptive." Marcus walked past her without a word, the small cut on his lip now dried. As he passed, Veronica grabbed his arm. "Do you know what you've done?" she hissed. "You people always make everything about race." Officers quickly separated them, with one saying, "Ma'am, please don't make this worse for yourself." Within hours, Marcus was sitting in a private lounge at the airport while his father's legal team took statements from willing passengers. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications as the video spread online. A call came in from Harold Reynolds, Transglobal Airlines' CEO, personally apologizing for the unfortunate incident. "We at Transglobal have zero tolerance for this behavior," Reynolds said, his voice carefully modulated. "I want to assure you the employee in question has been suspended pending investigation. We'd like to offer compensation for your distress. Perhaps a year of unlimited first-class travel and $100,000 as a gesture of goodwill." Marcus, coached by the lawyers sitting beside him, declined politely. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, but this isn't about money or perks. This is about dignity and ensuring others don't face similar treatment." After the call ended, Marcus's social media accounts exploded with support. Friends from his elite private school posted messages of solidarity. The video had been viewed millions of times, with most commenters expressing outrage. But there was another darker current emerging. Some users questioned whether Marcus had provoked the flight attendant. Others suggested he was playing the race card to get attention or compensation. By evening, Transglobal Airlines released a statement announcing Veronica Whitehall's termination, calling her actions completely contrary to our values of inclusivity and respect. Reynolds believed this swift action would contain the crisis. He was wrong. Veronica appeared on Next News that night, her eyes red-rimmed. "I've dedicated 20 years to customer service," she said tearfully. "This entitled young man became aggressive when I couldn't immediately provide a blanket because I was helping another passenger. I felt threatened. He leaned toward me in a menacing way. I reacted instinctively to protect myself." The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "So you're saying this had nothing to do with his race?" "Absolutely not. I don't see color. I'm the victim of cancel culture and a wealthy family using their privilege to destroy my career." The interview went viral within conservative circles. White supremacist forums embraced Veronica as a symbol of the persecution of white Americans. By morning, Stand With Veronica was trending, with users posting about their own negative experiences with entitled minorities. Marcus watched this unfold from his hotel room, where he'd been forced to relocate after the address of their New York apartment was leaked online. His father joined him, having flown in on his private jet after the news broke. "I'm sorry you're going through this," Elijah said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "But I'm proud of how you're handling it." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "They're trying to make me the villain just like you said they would. And just like I taught you, we'll let their own actions expose them," Elijah replied, as the news playing on the television showed protesters gathering outside Transglobal's headquarters. What had begun as a simple request for a blanket was now igniting a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability. And it was about to get much worse. The death threats began arriving 3 days after the incident. The first came to Marcus's personal email, a detailed description of what the anonymous sender planned to do to uppity black people who didn't know their place. The FBI was notified, but agents seemed skeptical that the threats warranted serious investigation. "Unfortunately, this kind of online harassment is common in high-profile incidents," explained Agent Carter, a tired-looking man who seemed annoyed to be assigned to the case. "Most are just keyboard warriors who never follow through." Elijah Chambers wasn't willing to take that chance. He hired a private security team to protect his son and increase security at all family properties. The controversy had expanded. Beyond a single incident on an airplane, it had become a flashpoint in America's ongoing struggle with racism. Conservative news network Freedom Media ran segments questioning Marcus's character, digging into his past for any hint of wrongdoing. They found nothing, but that didn't stop them from speculating. Sources close to the situation allegedly claimed Marcus had a history of making false accusations. No such sources existed, but the claims spread nonetheless. One evening segment particularly disturbed the Chambers family. The host, Tucker Wallace, played the slap video but with crucial seconds removed, the part where Marcus politely showed his ticket. The edited version jumped directly from Veronica saying he was in the wrong seat to Marcus appearing to argue with her. "What we're not being shown," Wallace intoned seriously, "is what this young man said to provoke such a reaction from a veteran flight attendant with a spotless record." Veronica Whitehall's spotless record was another fabrication, but it played well to an audience predisposed to believe her. She had transformed overnight from disgraced employee to conservative media darling, giving interviews about airplane safety and the challenging passengers flight attendants face. Without explicitly mentioning race, she planted the idea that certain types of passengers were inherently more problematic than others. When Marcus returned to school, he found his locker defaced with racial slurs. Anonymous notes appeared on his desk. "Go back to coach where you belong." The school administration's response was tepid at best. "We'll look into it," the principal assured Elijah during a tense meeting. "But without knowing who's responsible, there's only so much we can do." "Install cameras," Elijah suggested, his voice level but firm. "Expel the students responsible. Make a clear statement that racism won't be tolerated." The principal shifted, uncomfortably. "Mr. Chambers, we need to be careful not to overreact. These are just kids." "My son is just a kid too," Elijah replied. "But he doesn't get the luxury of being treated like one." That evening, Elijah suggested pulling Marcus from the school. "We can find somewhere safer. Somewhere that takes these issues seriously." Marcus shook his head. "If I leave, they win. I'm staying." Meanwhile, Transglobal Airlines was facing a boycott led by civil rights organizations. Their stock had dropped 15% in a week, prompting an emergency board meeting. CEO Harold Reynolds was scrambling to contain the damage, hiring a black-owned PR firm to help rebuild the company's image and announcing new diversity training for all staff. These efforts were undermined when a complete video of the incident leaked from the plane's security camera. It clearly showed Marcus, being perfectly calm and respectful, definitively disproving Veronica's claims of feeling threatened. Instead of acknowledging this evidence, certain media outlets simply stopped covering the story, while others doubled down. Freedom Media invited body language experts to analyze the footage, claiming Marcus displayed subtle aggressive cues that the untrained eye might miss. They slowed down the video, freezing frames to point out how Marcus invaded Veronica's space by handing her his boarding pass. A completely normal action twisted into something sinister. The video manipulation reached new heights when an AI-generated clip appeared online, seemingly showing Marcus using a racial slur against Veronica before the slap. Though quickly debunked as fake, the damage was done. Millions saw the fraudulent clip, while only a fraction saw the correction. As Marcus and his family weathered this storm of misinformation, they noticed something troubling. The story was being systematically twisted to protect not just Veronica, but the entire system that had enabled her behavior. What had begun as one woman's racist action had revealed a vast network dedicated to maintaining the status quo, willing to deploy sophisticated propaganda techniques to villainize a teenager rather than acknowledge the reality of racism. "They're not just coming after you," Elijah told his son gravely. "They're coming after anyone who might be inspired by you to speak up." Marcus nodded, his young face showing a wisdom beyond his years. "So what do we do?" "We take this to court," Elijah replied. "We make them answer for everything under oath." Neither of them realized then how the system would fight back against even this attempt at justice. The Chambers family filed a discrimination lawsuit against Transglobal Airlines exactly 2 weeks after the incident. The complaint detailed not just the slap, but the pattern of discriminatory treatment Marcus experienced throughout the flight. The family's legal team, led by renowned civil rights attorney Vanessa Washington, requested punitive damages and mandatory changes to the airline's training and hiring practices. "This case is about more than one incident or one employee," Washington stated at a press conference outside the federal courthouse. "It's about a culture that emboldens people like Veronica Whitehall and then protects them when they act on their prejudices." Transglobal's initial response was conciliatory and public, but combative behind closed doors. They offered to settle for $2 million, with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Marcus from ever discussing the case. The Chambers family declined. "We don't need their money," Elijah told reporters. "We need accountability and real change." The airline's strategy shifted dramatically when Veronica Whitehall, backed by a conservative legal foundation, filed a countersuit against Marcus for defamation. Her complaint alleged that Marcus had deliberately misrepresented their interaction to damage her reputation and extract money from the airline. The foundation provided her with high-powered attorneys who normally represented Fortune 500 companies, not flight attendants. "We cannot allow cancel culture to destroy the life and livelihood of an innocent woman," said James Prestwick, Whitehall's lead attorney. "Ms. Whitehall has suffered extreme emotional distress, death threats, and permanent or damage to her career prospects." The case was assigned to Judge William Hargrove, a federal judge with a troubling history that the Chambers legal team quickly uncovered. In his 15 years on the bench, Hargrove had dismissed 87% of discrimination cases before they reached trial. His rulings frequently cited insufficient evidence of racial motivation, even when evidence seemed abundant to outside observers. More concerning was Washington's discovery that Hargrove had previously worked for the same law firm that represented Transglobal's insurance company and had vacationed at a property owned by Harold Reynolds' brother. "We need to request recusal based on conflict of interest," Washington advised the Chambers family. "But we need to tread carefully. Judges have wide latitude, and accusations of bias can backfire." Before they could file the motion, Marcus was scheduled for a deposition in Whitehall's defamation suit. For 6 grueling hours, Prestwick tried to trip up the teenager, asking the same questions repeatedly in different ways, insinuating contradictions where none existed, and attempting to provoke an emotional response. Marcus remained composed, answering clearly and consistently. When shown the doctored video from Freedom Media, he calmly pointed out the missing sections. When questioned about his history of race baiting, a complete fabrication, he simply stated, "I have no such history. That claim is false." By the end of the deposition, even Prestwick seemed grudgingly impressed. One junior attorney on the defense team was seen shaking his head in apparent disbelief at the teenager's poise. That evening, Transglobal's attorneys contacted Washington with a new settlement offer, $5 million and a public apology, still with an NDA. Again, the Chambers family refused. "We're not going away quietly," Elijah informed them. The airline's next move suggested they had anticipated this response. Judge Hargrove issued a preliminary ruling that severely limited the scope of discovery in the discrimination case. The Chamber's legal team would not be permitted to request documents related to other discrimination complaints against the airline, employee training materials, or internal communications about the incident. Essentially, they could only present evidence of what happened on the plane itself, nothing about the broader culture that enabled it. "This is textbook," Washington explained to Marcus and Elijah. "Isolate the incident. Treat it as one bad apple rather than a systemic issue. Without context, it becomes much harder to prove discriminatory intent." "Can we appeal?" Marcus asked. "Not yet," Washington replied. "Preliminary rulings like this aren't immediately appealable. We have to wait for final judgment or find another way around it." The restrictive ruling dominated legal news, with civil rights attorneys across the country expressing concern about the precedent it could set. If companies could shield themselves from discovery in discrimination cases, proving systemic bias would become nearly impossible. As Marcus left the courthouse after the ruling, a reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "How does it feel to know the judge doesn't believe your claims of discrimination?" Before Marcus could answer, Washington stepped in. "The ruling isn't about belief. It's about what evidence will be permitted. We remain confident in our case." But privately, the legal team was concerned. Without access to the airline's internal documents, proving that Marcus's treatment was part of a pattern would be significantly more difficult. They needed something to break their way, and soon. Or the case that had begun with clear video evidence might still be lost in the labyrinth of a system designed to protect corporations over individuals. That evening, as Marcus stared out the window of his family's apartment, he wondered if coming forward had been worth it. The threats, the media attacks, the legal obstacles, all for what? A slap that lasted less than a second, but had consumed his life for weeks. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I have information that will help your case. Former Transglobal flight attendant, can we meet?" Marcus stared at the message, hope and suspicion warring within him. Was this a genuine ally, or another trap in a game that seemed increasingly rigged against him? Would you trust a mysterious text from an unknown number promising to help your case? Type "trust" in the comments if you think Marcus should meet this potential whistleblower, or "trap" if you believe it's another setup. Don't forget to smash that like button if you're invested in seeing justice prevail, and subscribe to follow Marcus's fight against a system that's stacked against him. What would you do if you were in his position with everything on the line? Marcus showed the text to his father and Vanessa Washington, who arranged for the meeting to take place at their law offices with security present. The next morning, Latina woman in her 30s entered the conference room, her eyes darting nervously to the corners as if expecting to be ambushed. "My name is Sofia Rodriguez. I worked for Transglobal for 8 years before quitting 3 months ago," she said, placing a flash drive on the table. "Everything you need is on this." Rodriguez had been collecting evidence of racial discrimination at the airline for years. As one of the few flight attendants of color, she'd witnessed and experienced countless incidents. Black passengers consistently receiving worse service, minority employees passed over for promotion, complaints about racism dismissed or buried. Most damning were her recordings of Veronica Whitehall. She was proud of how she treated certain passengers, Rodriguez explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. She called it putting them in their place. Management knew. They not only tolerated it, they promoted her for maintaining what they called standards. The flash drive contained performance reviews praising Whitehall for her discretion, with passenger selection for upgrades and maintaining the premium cabin atmosphere. Corporate euphemisms for keeping first class predominantly white. There were documented incidents where Whitehall had been reported for discriminatory behavior, only to have the complaints mysteriously disappear from her file. "This changes everything," Washington said, reviewing the documents. "But we need to move carefully. Judge Hargrove will try to exclude this evidence under his preliminary ruling." They filed a motion to recuse Hargrove based on his previously undisclosed connections to Transglobal. The motion included selected documents from Rodriguez showing the pattern of discrimination, arguing that they demonstrated the need for broader discovery that Hargrove had denied. That evening, Rodriguez called Marcus in a panic. "Someone broke into my apartment. My computer's gone, and they left a note saying, 'Keep your mouth shut.' The police won't take it seriously. They're saying it's just a random burglary." Why so? Chambers' family immediately arranged for Rodriguez to stay in a secure location. Their security team found sophisticated surveillance equipment outside her apartment building. Clearly, someone had been watching her. The threats against the Chambers family intensified as well. Elijah's car was vandalized with racial slurs. Marcus received letters describing in graphic detail what would happen if he continued the lawsuit. The police response remained lukewarm, with officers suggesting they were overreacting to typical internet trolls. TransGlobal's legal team responded to the recusal motion with surprising aggression, accusing the Chambers family of judge shopping and Rodriguez of stealing confidential company documents. They filed for a gag order to prevent any further public discussion of the case. Before the recusal motion could be decided, investigative journalist Aisha Johnson published an explosive piece in The Atlantic detailing Judge Hargrove's extensive connections to TransGlobal. Not only had he worked for their insurance company's law firm, but his son was currently employed by a subsidiary of TransGlobal's parent company. Most damning was evidence that Hargrove had received expensive gifts from Harold Reynolds, including an all-expenses-paid hunting trip valued at over $50,000. The article created a firestorm. Judicial oversight committees announced investigations. Law schools used the case as an example of judicial misconduct in ethics classes. Public pressure mounted until, 3 days later, Hargrove recused himself with a terse statement citing the appearance of potential conflicts that might distract from the legal issues at hand. It was the first real victory for Marcus and his family, but it came at a cost. Rodriguez had lost her job, her home, and her sense of security. Marcus was learning the hard way that the system didn't yield easily, and those who challenged it faced severe consequences. "We got lucky with Johnson's article," Washington cautioned. "But this is just one battle. The war is far from over." She was right. The airline's attorneys were already working on their next move, and it would strike at the heart of Marcus's future. The letter from Stanford University arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official letterhead and formal language masking the blow it delivered. "After careful reconsideration of your application materials, we regret to inform you that your admission has been rescinded." Marcus read it twice, unable to process the words. He had earned his spot at Stanford through perfect grades, revolutionary app development, and glowing recommendations. Now it was gone, with only a vague reference to new information that conflicts with application standards. Vanessa Washington immediately contacted Stanford's administration, only to be stonewalled with references to confidentiality in admissions decisions. It took nearly a week of legal pressure before a sympathetic assistant dean called anonymously. A major donor threatened to withdraw a $100 million pledge if Marcus remained admitted, the dean explained. "We tried to fight it, but the board caved. The donor is William Harrington." Harrington was on TransGlobal's board of directors. The attack on Marcus's future was just the beginning. Elijah's business partners began receiving pressure from mysterious sources. Investment deals suddenly fell through. Banking relationships became strained. A regulatory investigation was launched into Chambers Technologies based on anonymous tips that later proved baseless, but not before the company's stock dropped 20%. "They're trying to make us toxic," Elijah explained to his son. "Isolate us, drain our resources, make us give up." Marcus experienced the pressure more directly. Driving home from a study group, he noticed a black SUV following him. When he took random turns to confirm his suspicion, the vehicle stayed close behind. Marcus called his security team, who advised him to drive directly to a police station. As he pulled into the station parking lot, the SUV accelerated alongside him. The window lowered, and Marcus glimpsed a camera lens before the vehicle sped away. The next morning, a different vehicle followed him. This pattern continued for days, never the same car but always present, always watching. When Marcus reported this to the police, the officer taking his statement seemed skeptical. "Lots of black SUVs in this city, son. Unless they make an actual threat, There's not much we can do." The threat came 3 days later. As Marcus left school, 2 men approached from opposite directions. One blocked his path to his car, while the other moved to cut off his retreat. They might have succeeded in grabbing him if Marcus's security detail hadn't intervened, tackling one man while the other fled. The apprehended man carried no identification, but had a syringe containing a powerful sedative. He refused to say who had hired him, and the police, finally taking the situation seriously, could find no leads. That night, the Chambers family home was vandalized. Security cameras captured 3 masked figures spray painting racial slurs across the front of the house and smashing windows. When police arrived, they initially suggested it might be just teenagers pulling a prank, until Elijah showed them the footage of clearly adult perpetrators and pointed out the targeted nature of the vandalism. "This isn't random," he said firmly. "This is intimidation related to our lawsuit." The officer shrugged. "Without seeing their faces, there's no way to connect this to your legal issues." The psychological toll on Marcus became increasingly evident. He developed anxiety about leaving the house, jumping at sudden noises and constantly checking for surveillance. His grades began to slip. He lost weight. The confident, ambitious teenager was being worn down by the constant pressure. "Maybe we should drop the case," Marcus suggested one night, his voice hollow. "It's affecting everyone's lives. Dad's business, Mom's charity work, even Sofia Rodriguez has lost everything. All because I couldn't just stay quiet about a slap." "This was never just about a slap," Elijah responded, placing his hands on his son's shoulders. "This is about a system that punishes people for standing up against injustice. If we back down now, they win forever." The next day, Marcus's laptop and phone were hacked despite top-tier security measures. His private messages, photos, and location data were posted online alongside threatening comments. The hack was sophisticated enough that cybersecurity experts suspected nation-state-level capabilities, resources far beyond what an individual like Veronica Whitehall could access. "They're pulling out all the stops," Washington observed grimly, "which means they're scared of what happens if we actually get our day in court." What none of them realized yet was that the forces aligned against them were even more powerful than they had imagined, extending to the highest levels of corporate and political influence. Judge Rebecca Chen's appointment to replace Hargrove initially seemed promising. Her record showed no obvious biases, and her first ruling overturned Hargrove's discovery limitations, allowing the Chambers legal team to request TransGlobal's internal documents related to discrimination complaints. But as weeks passed, delays accumulated. Routine motions took unusually long to be decided. TransGlobal's attorneys filed endless procedural objections that required court time to resolve. When Washington submitted urgency requests, they were denied without explanation. "It's like running in quicksand," she told the Chambers family during a strategy meeting. "They're dragging this out, hoping we'll exhaust our resources or give up." Then came a more concrete setback. Key evidence from Sofia Rodriguez's flash drive was ruled inadmissible. The judge claimed that because Rodriguez had obtained the documents while employed by TransGlobal, they constituted stolen corporate property rather than whistleblower evidence. This ruling contradicted established precedent in similar cases. "Something's not right," Washington said after reviewing the ruling. "This reasoning is so flawed it would never survive appeal, but it gives them exactly what they need right now, keeping the jury from seeing evidence of systematic discrimination." The legal team filed an emergency appeal, but before it could be heard, another problem emerged. Critical evidence in the court records, including the complete, unedited video from the plane and passenger statements, was discovered to be missing from the official file. When Washington raised the issue, court clerks claimed the documents had never been properly submitted, despite receipts proving otherwise. The situation deteriorated further when Sofia Rodriguez disappeared the day before she was scheduled to give an official deposition. She missed her security detail during a grocery store trip and vanished. Her phone was found in a trash can behind the store, wiped clean of data. The FBI finally became involved, but their investigation seemed performative at best. Agents interviewed Marcus and his family, asking superficial questions and taking minimal notes. When Elijah pressed about Rodriguez's disappearance, the lead agent sighed. "Mr. Chambers, we understand your concerns, but there's no concrete evidence of foul play. Ms. Rodriguez is an adult who may have chosen to leave. Perhaps the pressure of the case became too much." Washington managed to get a meeting with an old law school classmate now working at the Justice Department, hoping for insight or assistance. Her friend was sympathetic but blunt. "There are calls coming from very high up to treat this as a low priority. I can't say more, but you're up against something bigger than an airline or a racist flight attendant." The media coverage that had initially spotlighted the case began to fade as other stories captured public attention. When Marcus checked social media, he found fewer posts about his situation and more promoted content about TransGlobal's new diversity initiatives and community outreach programs, a transparent attempt to rehabilitate their image while continuing to fight him in court. The combination of legal obstacles, missing evidence, Rodriguez's disappearance, and waning public attention left Marcus feeling increasingly hopeless. During a particularly difficult day when yet another ruling went against them, he questioned whether continuing the fight was worth it. "What if we never get justice? What if all this suffering is for nothing?" he asked Washington. Before she could answer, Elijah's phone rang. It was his company's chief financial officer, reporting that the IRS had just arrived unannounced to conduct a random audit of the last 5 years of business records. The timing was anything but random. That evening, while reviewing case documents, Marcus found himself researching TransGlobal's corporate structure out of frustration. Following a complex web of subsidiaries and holding companies, he discovered something the legal team had missed. TransGlobal Airlines was ultimately owned by Meridian Global Enterprises, a massive conglomerate controlled by billionaire Richard Whitman, one of the country's largest political donors. Further research revealed that Whitman had contributed millions to judicial election campaigns, including supporting several judges now serving in the same court system handling their case. He had also funded think tanks that produced research, questioning the existence of systemic racism in America. "This isn't just about an airline defending itself," Marcus told Washington the next morning, showing her his findings. "It's about protecting a system of power. They're afraid that if we win, it opens the door for others to challenge the entire structure." Washington nodded grimly. "Which means we need to change our strategy. If the courts are compromised and the media is losing interest, we need to find another way to create pressure." What they didn't realize was that help was about to come from an unexpected direction, as others who had faced similar discrimination began to find their own courage. From Marcus's example, "Have you ever stood up against injustice only to find yourself standing alone?" Type solidarity in the comments if you believe in the power of people uniting against discrimination. Like this video if you think Marcus deserves justice after everything he's been through, and subscribe to see how the public finally rallies behind him. What would it take for you to speak out against a powerful system trying to silence the truth? The turning point began with a single TikTok video. A young black woman named Jasmine Taylor shared her experience of being denied service by Veronica Whitehall on a TransGlobal flight 3 years earlier. "When I saw what happened to Marcus Chambers, I knew I wasn't crazy. This was her pattern," Taylor explained, showing documentation of her ignored complaint. Taylor's video went viral, inspiring others to come forward. Within days, hundreds of passengers shared similar experiences on TransGlobal flights, not just with Whitehall, but with multiple employees. The hashtag #TransGlobalTruth exploded across social media platforms, accompanied by Tasha's Justice for Marcus. Former employees joined the chorus, describing a corporate culture that rewarded discrimination under the guise of customer experience management. A former HR manager revealed how discrimination complaints were systematically buried, with complainants often offered vouchers and miles in exchange for signing confidentiality agreements. Where traditional media had moved on, social media kept the story alive. Data analysts created visualizations showing patterns of discriminatory treatment across TransGlobal's routes and service classes. Passenger testimonials were compiled into a searchable database, revealing consistent behaviors across years of service. Celebrity support amplified the movement. Basketball star LeBron James tweeted, What happened to Marcus Chambers is happening to black travelers every day. I stand with him. Filmmaker Ava DuVernay announced plans for a documentary on the case. Oprah Winfrey invited Marcus onto her show, giving him a platform to share his story unfiltered by hostile media narratives. The renewed attention forced news organizations to cover the case again. TransGlobal's stock price, which had begun to recover, plummeted to new lows as the boycott gained momentum. Institutional investors began asking uncomfortable questions about the company's handling of the situation. The breaking point came when a TransGlobal IT specialist anonymously leaked internal documents confirming everything Sofia Rodriguez had claimed and more. The documents showed that TransGlobal had a formalized but unwritten policy of passenger profiling that explicitly targeted minorities for increased scrutiny and reduced service quality. Most damning was an email chain, including CEO Harold Reynolds, discussing the Marcus Chambers situation weeks before it happened. We've had concerns about Whitehall's approach to passenger selection, but her first-class customer satisfaction ratings among our core demographic are too valuable to address the issue directly, one executive wrote. The leak went viral, forcing TransGlobal to issue a statement claiming the documents were fabricated, a claim quickly disproven when metadata analysis confirmed their authenticity. Reynolds was placed on administrative leave by the board, and the company's legal strategy began showing signs of fracturing. Energized by the public support, Marcus organized a peaceful protest outside TransGlobal's headquarters in Atlanta. Thousands attended, including other victims of discrimination, civil rights leaders, and allies from across the country. Marcus spoke passionately about systemic racism in corporate America, careful to keep the focus on accountability rather than vengeance. "This isn't about punishing one person or one company," he told the crowd. "It's about changing a system that treats people differently based on the color of their skin. It's about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." The protest remained peaceful until a small group of men in unmarked clothing began throwing objects at the police line. Chaos erupted as officers responded with tear gas and flashbang grenades. In the confusion, Marcus was separated from his security detail and tackled by police officers who claimed he had incited the violence. Body camera footage later revealed the men who started the conflict had arrived together and left immediately after initiating the confrontation. Facial recognition identified two as former military contractors with connections to a security firm employed by Meridian Global Enterprises, Richard Whitman's company. But this evidence came too late to prevent Marcus from spending a night in jail, where he experienced firsthand the discrimination of the criminal justice system. "They didn't let me call my lawyer for 6 hours," he told Washington after his release. One officer said I should have stayed in my lane instead of making trouble. Another suggested that my father's money wouldn't help me in there. Despite the intimidation, the protest achieved its purpose. TransGlobal's public image was in tatters, and pressure mounted on the legal system to ensure the case received fair treatment. Judge Chen, perhaps sensing the shifting public sentiment, began ruling more eventuously on procedural matters. The movement Marcus had inspired was growing beyond his case, shining light on discrimination throughout the travel industry and beyond. For the first time since the ordeal began, it seemed possible that justice might actually be achieved, not through the system working as designed, but through people united in demanding that it work as promised. But powerful forces remained, determined to silence Marcus, and they were about to take their most dangerous action yet. Marcus's night in jail was just the beginning of a coordinated effort to break his spirit. Despite his father's influence and immediate legal response, the process of securing his release dragged inexplicably. Elijah arrived at the detention center within an hour of Marcus's arrest, accompanied by Vanessa Washington and 2 other attorneys, but they were told processing would take as long as necessary. Inside, Marcus was placed in a holding cell with adults despite being a minor. One officer accidentally mentioned to other detainees that Marcus was the rich kid suing the airline. The implied invitation for harassment was clear, though thankfully most detainees ignored it. "Keep your head down and mouth shut," an older black man advised him quietly. "This is how they break people like us. They're hoping you'll do something they can use against you." Marcus followed this advice. remaining silent even when officers taunted him with comments about being too good for jail or suggesting his father's money couldn't help him now. One officer deliberately spilled coffee on Marcus's shirt, then wrote him up for creating a disturbance when he flinched. After 12 hours without access to counsel, a clear violation of his rights, Marcus was finally brought to an interview room where Washington waited. Her normally composed expression was tight with controlled fury. "They've been stonewalling us all night," she explained, "and they've charged you with inciting a riot, assaulting an officer, and resisting arrest. All felonies." The evidence against Marcus was fabricated. Police body cam footage had been selectively edited to show him appearing to struggle during arrest while removing the preceding footage, showing officers tackling him without provocation. The assault was Marcus reflexively raising his arms to protect his face. The incitement charge was based on his speech at the protest, with specific quotes taken out of context. It took 3 more hours and intervention from a federal judge before Marcus was finally released on bail. The conditions were unusually restrictive. He couldn't leave the state, had to wear an ankle monitor, and was prohibited from speaking publicly about the case or attending further protests. As he walked out of the detention center, reporters shouted questions about his violent resistance and privileged response to arrest. The narrative had already been shaped before he could speak a word in his own defense. The criminal charges transformed the situation. Now, instead of just fighting a civil lawsuit against Transglobal, Marcus faced potential prison time. The district attorney pursuing the case, Thomas Grayson, was known for his tough-on-crime stance and had received significant campaign contributions from Richard Whitman's Political Action Committee. "They're trying to make an example of you," Elijah said as they drove home. "A successful black family challenging the system. They need to show others what happens if they try the same thing." At home, they discovered Marcus's younger sister, Zora, had been hospitalized after collapsing at school. The 14-year-old had been under tremendous stress as classmates bullied her about her brother's situation. Social media trolls had published the family's address, her school schedule, and threats against her. The accumulated fear and anxiety had manifested in physical symptoms severe enough to require medical attention. Seeing his sister in a hospital bed, pale and frightened, with monitoring equipment attached to her thin arms, hit Marcus harder than anything else that had happened. This wasn't just about him anymore. His entire family was suffering the consequences of his stand against injustice. "I'm sorry," he whispered, holding Zora's hand. "I never meant for this to hurt you." She squeezed his hand weakly. "Don't apologize, you did the right thing. They're the ones who should be sorry." But the system showed no remorse. Instead, it continued its relentless assault. The FBI investigation into Sofia Rodriguez's disappearance was quietly closed, citing lack of evidence of foul play. The criminal trial against Marcus was fast-tracked, while the civil case against Transglobal languished. Medical records documenting his injuries during arrest mysteriously vanished from the hospital system. Vanessa Washington assembled a criminal defense team to handle the new charges, but she warned the family that they were fighting an uphill battle. "The system is designed to protect itself," she explained. "They've criminalized your resistance, precisely because it was effective." As days passed, Marcus struggled to recognize his life. Once focused on technology innovation and college preparations, he now spent his days meeting with lawyers, checking in with his probation officer, and watching his family suffer. His father's business continued to face regulatory scrutiny that somehow never found wrongdoing, but never ended either. His mother had taken a leave of absence from her medical practice after receiving threats from patients who believed the media portrayals of her son. The family that had once exemplified black excellence and achievement was being systematically dismantled by a system determined to protect its own interests at any cost. Each new attack seemed designed not just to defeat Marcus legally, but to break him personally, to make him regret ever speaking up. Late one night, as Marcus sat alone in his room, staring at the ankle monitor that marked him as an alleged criminal, he received a text from an unknown number. "Still fighting? They won't stop until you're destroyed or silenced. But you're not alone. Check your email." The message came with an encrypted file containing internal communications from the district attorney's office. The documents revealed explicit coordination between prosecutors, TransGlobal's attorneys, and Richard Whitman's associates to make an example of Marcus. One email bluntly stated, "Need to ensure the Chambers boy faces consequences severe enough to discourage others from similar actions. Priority directive from RW." Marcus now had evidence of a conspiracy against him, but using it meant exposing the whistleblower who had risked everything to send it. As he weighed his options, he realized the system had made a critical mistake. They had pushed him to a point where he had nothing left to lose. Marcus stared at his laptop screen, finger hovering over the upload button. The video he had created meticulously documented everything that had happened since the slap, the media manipulation, the judicial conflicts of interest, the coordinated attacks on his family, and now the conspiracy to prosecute him on false charges. Once published, there would be no going back. The system would retaliate with everything it had. "Are you sure about this?" Elijah asked, standing behind him. "This will make things worse before they get better." Marcus nodded. "They're already trying to destroy us. At least this way people will know why." He clicked the button, and Truth versus Power, the Marcus Chambers story, began uploading to multiple platforms simultaneously, with copies automatically forwarded to journalists, activists, and international media outlets beyond the reach of American corporate influence. The video went viral within hours, accumulating millions of views despite attempts to suppress it. Social media platforms reported unprecedented pressure from advertisers to remove the content, but public backlash prevented them from complying. Distarim, Truth vs. Power and Stand with Marcus became the top trending topics worldwide. While the video transformed public perception, Marcus was working on something with even greater potential impact. Using his programming skills, he developed an application called Transparency Now that allowed users to document, report, and track instances of discrimination by corporations. The app cross-referenced reports to identify patterns, creating a publicly accessible database that exposed systematic issues rather than treating each incident as isolated. "If they want to make an example of me, I'll make myself the example they never wanted," Marcus told his sister as she helped test the beta version. "They thought criminalizing me would silence the movement. Instead, it's given me the platform to create real change." TransGlobal Airlines was the first company profiled on the app, with hundreds of discrimination reports creating a damning picture of institutional racism. Other airlines followed, then hotels, restaurants, and retail chains. Within weeks, Transparency now had over 5 million users documenting discrimination across every sector of American business. International media, beyond the influence of American corporate interests, picked up the story. BBC, Al Jazeera, and Der Spiegel ran in-depth features on Marcus's case, highlighting how American systems of power work to suppress challenges to racial hierarchy. The global attention made it increasingly difficult for domestic media to maintain their biased framing. The criminal case against Marcus began to unravel as public scrutiny intensified. Forensic analysis of police body cam footage revealed the edits made to incriminate him. Officers involved in his arrest were identified in previous excessive force complaints against minority suspects. Judge Chen, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, allowed these findings into evidence despite prosecution objections. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A collective of anonymous hackers inspired by Marcus's courage infiltrated TransGlobal's servers and released thousands of internal communications. The emails confirmed everything Sofia Rodriguez had claimed, and worse, explicit discussions of racial profiling, deliberate suppression of discrimination complaints, and coordination with media allies to control public narratives. Most damning was an email chain between Harold Reynolds, Richard Whitman, and Veronica Whitehall that predated the incident with Marcus. The messages revealed that Whitehall had been specifically instructed to maintain standards in first class by discouraging non-traditional passengers from receiving equal service. Reynolds had personally protected Whitehall after previous complaints, considering her valuable in preserving the experience our core customers expect. The leak devastated TransGlobal's already damaged reputation. Their stock went into freefall as investors fled. Major corporate clients canceled contracts, unwilling to associate with the toxic brand. The boycott, which had begun to fade, roared back to life with renewed purpose. Vanessa Washington moved aggressively to leverage the new evidence in both the criminal and civil cases. In a masterful legal stroke, she scheduled a press conference where Marcus would present new evidence, then arranged for Veronica Whitehall to be present as a heckler, a role she eagerly embraced. When Whitehall began shouting accusations during Marcus's statement, he calmly invited her to the microphone. "Ms. Whitehall, since you're here, would you like to explain these emails where you discuss targeting passengers based on race?" Flustered and angry, Whitehall launched into a rant that inadvertently confirmed the allegations. "Those people don't belong in first class. Everyone knows it. We just can't say it publicly. You people always play the victim when you're asked to stay in your place." The tirade, captured by dozens of cameras and instantly viral, was a confession more damning than any leaked document. By the next morning, even Whitehall's most ardent defenders had gone silent, unwilling to associate with her explicitly racist views. For the first time since the ordeal began, Marcus allowed himself to feel hope. The system was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. When enough people stood together against injustice, even the most entrenched powers could be forced to bend. What he didn't yet realize was that the final battle would require him to make the most difficult choice of all, between personal vindication and lasting change. The criminal charges against Marcus were dismissed with prejudice after a scathing ruling from Judge Chen, who cited prosecutorial misconduct of the most egregious nature and referred District Attorney Grayson to the Bar Association for ethical violations. The evidence of coordination between the DA's office and TransGlobal's attorneys had proven impossible to explain away. Marcus's ankle monitor was removed, his travel restrictions lifted, and his record expunged. The officers involved in his arrest were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The FBI reopened its inquiry into Sofia Rodriguez's disappearance, this time treating it as a potential kidnapping rather than a voluntary absence. Media coverage shifted dramatically. News outlets that had characterized Marcus as an entitled troublemaker now praised his extraordinary courage in the face of systemic oppression. Commentators who had questioned his motives now cited him as an example of the best of American activism. The transformation was so complete that Marcus found it almost amusing. The same system that had tried to destroy him now scrambled to position itself on the right side of history. His reinstatement to Stanford came with a formal apology and an offer of a full scholarship. The university deeply regrets its failure to stand by its principles in the face of external pressure. The letter stated, "Your courage in confronting injustice exemplifies the qualities we seek to nurture in our students." TransGlobal Airlines, facing bankruptcy as passengers abandoned it in droves, underwent a dramatic leadership change. The board forced CEO Harold Reynolds to resign, replacing him with Dr. Angela Freeman, a respected organizational psychologist specializing in institutional culture change. Her first act was to reach out to the Chambers family to discuss meaningful restitution and structural reform. The civil case against TransGlobal, once stalled by procedural obstacles, now accelerated toward trial. With Judge Chen allowing full discovery, TransGlobal's history of discrimination was laid bare. Statistical evidence showed black passengers received demonstrably worse service, were more likely to be removed from flights, and had their complaints dismissed at higher rates than white passengers making identical claims. Vanessa Washington prepared for trial with confidence, but Marcus and his family still carried the scars of their ordeal. Zora had developed anxiety that required therapy. Elijah's company was recovering from the regulatory harassment, but had lost valuable partnerships. Marcus himself struggled with trust issues and hypervigilance, legacies of months spent under constant threat. The night before jury selection was set to begin, Marcus received a call from Washington. "TransGlobal wants to settle," she said. "They're offering $200 million, a public admission of wrongdoing, and agreement to a court-supervised diversity overhaul." "That sounds promising," Marcus replied cautiously. "There's a catch," Washington continued. "They're insisting on a non-disclosure agreement. You'd never be able to discuss the case or their discriminatory practices publicly again. The offer presented Marcus with an impossible choice. The financial settlement would secure his family's future and fund anti-discrimination work for years. The admission of wrongdoing would validate his claims. The diversity overhaul would help prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. But the NDA would silence him permanently on the very issues he had fought to expose. It would turn his personal victory into a private resolution rather than a public reckoning. It would allow TransGlobal to contain the damage rather than catalyze broader change. They're offering everything we asked for in the complaint, Washington noted. From a legal perspective, it's a complete victory. But from a moral perspective, Marcus asked. Washington sighed. That's not for me to say. This has to be your decision. Marcus spent the night weighing his options. The settlement offered certainty, a guaranteed outcome rather than the risks of trial. It would end the ordeal that had consumed his family's life. It would force meaningful changes at one major corporation, but it would also serve the system's ultimate goal, containing the challenge he represented. His silence would be purchased, his activism neutralized. The broader patterns of discrimination would remain largely unaddressed, with TransGlobal treated as an aberration rather than a symptom of deeper problems. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had come forward because of his example, every victim who had found courage in his stand, every future traveler who deserved equal treatment, regardless of their skin color. He called Washington with his answer, knowing that his choice would shape not just his own future, but potentially the future of corporate accountability in America. No deal, Marcus told the assembled legal teams in the settlement conference room. I won't sign an NDA that prevents me from speaking the truth about what happened. TransGlobal's attorneys exchanged glances. Their lead counsel leaned forward. Mr. Chambers, I don't think you understand the generosity of our offer. $200 million is unprecedented for a case of this nature. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied. You're not paying me for damages. You're paying me for silence. That's not justice, it's hush money. The civil trial proceeded, becoming one of the most closely watched legal battles in years. For 2 weeks, witnesses testified about TransGlobal's discriminatory practices. Former employees described the corporate culture that rewarded mistreatment of minority passengers. Experts presented statistics showing unmistakable patterns of bias. Passengers shared personal experiences of humiliation and disrespect. Veronica Whitehall, called as a hostile witness, proved to be her own worst enemy. Under Washington's skillful cross-examination, she repeatedly contradicted herself before finally admitting that she had been instructed to provide different levels of service based on passengers' perceived backgrounds. When asked directly if she had targeted Marcus because of his race, her evasive answer spoke volumes. I was just maintaining the standards our premium customers expect. On the final day of trial, TransGlobal's attorneys made a last desperate attempt to salvage their case, suggesting that Marcus had orchestrated the incident for publicity or financial gain. The argument fell flat against the mountain of evidence, showing systematic discrimination throughout the company. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict. TransGlobal Airlines had engaged in deliberate racial discrimination against Marcus Chambers and maintained policies encouraging similar treatment of other minority passengers. They awarded Marcus $50 million in compensatory damages and an unprecedented $750 million in punitive damages, explicitly citing the company's egregious and persistent pattern of discrimination and calculated efforts to conceal wrongdoing. Beyond the monetary award, the judge ordered TransGlobal to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms under court supervision for 10 years, including transparent reporting of passenger complaints, mandatory bias training for all employees, and independent auditing of service quality across demographic groups. As Marcus left the courthouse, he was met by Sofia Rodriguez, who had emerged from hiding after the FBI located her in a remote cabin purchased through a shell company linked to Richard Whitman. She had been held there initially against her will, then stayed hidden out of fear. I never thought we'd win, she told Marcus, tears in her eyes. They seemed too powerful. They were powerful, Marcus corrected her, but they weren't right. And eventually, that matters. The legal victory proved to be just the beginning. Using a substantial portion of the award, Marcus established the Equality in Transit Foundation, dedicated to fighting discrimination in all forms of transportation. The foundation funded research, supported litigation for victims without financial resources, and developed training programs for travel industry employees. Veronica Whitehall's troubles continued beyond the civil verdict. Evidence emerged that she had committed perjury in her initial statements and tampered with witness testimony, leading to criminal charges. Her fall from conservative media darling to convicted felon became a cautionary tale about the consequences of racism bolstered by institutional power. The most far-reaching impact came 3 months after the verdict, when federal prosecutors announced a sweeping corruption investigation based partially on evidence uncovered during Marcus's case. The investigation revealed a network of corporate executives, judges, and politicians who had collaborated to protect each other from accountability for various forms of misconduct, including racial discrimination. Judge William Hargrove was indicted for accepting bribes in exchange for favorable rulings. Harold Reynolds faced charges for witness tampering and conspiracy. Richard Whitman, the billionaire whose influence had nearly destroyed Marcus's life, was implicated in multiple schemes to obstruct justice. The district attorney who had pursued false charges against Marcus resigned in disgrace. Marcus still had nightmares about his time in detention. His sister still flinched at unexpected noises. His parents still checked security cameras before leaving the house. The trauma of their ordeal wouldn't disappear with the verdict or the subsequent victories. But they had stood against a system designed to crush them. And they had prevailed, not just for themselves, but for countless others who would benefit from the changes they had forced. 2 years after the slap that started everything, Marcus stood at a podium addressing the National Civil Rights Conference. Looking out at the audience of activists, lawyers, and ordinary citizens committed to fighting injustice, he reflected on the journey that had brought him there. People sometimes ask if it was worth it, all the pain, the threats, the attacks on my family, he said. My answer is always the same. It shouldn't have been necessary. In a just society, a black teenager wouldn't need to wage a 2-year legal battle just to be treated with basic dignity. But we don't yet live in that just society. We're building it together. One case, one protest, one victory at a time. He paused, looking at his parents and sister in the front row, then at Sophia Rodriguez and Vanessa Washington beside them, his unlikely allies in a fight none of them had chosen, but all had committed to winning. What happened to me on that plane wasn't about a blanket or a slap, Marcus continued. It was about a system that considers some people more valuable, more worthy of respect than others. Breaking that system isn't the work of one person or one case. It's the work of generations. But today, that system is a little less powerful, a little less protected than it was before. And that progress, however small, makes everything we endured worthwhile. As he concluded his speech to thunderous applause, Marcus knew their victory wasn't complete. The systems of power and privilege that had enabled his mistreatment still existed. Racism still shaped American institutions. Justice remained elusive, for many. But something fundamental had shifted. One corporation had been forced to change. One corrupt network had been exposed. And countless people had been inspired to continue the fight, armed with new tools, new precedents, and new hope that the arc of history, while long, could indeed be bent toward justice through persistent, strategic action. For Marcus Chambers, that knowledge was the greatest victory of all. The story of Marcus Chambers teaches us that fighting systemic racism requires extraordinary courage and resilience. When confronted with discrimination, Marcus didn't just seek personal compensation, he demanded accountability and structural change. His journey shows that powerful institutions will often deploy overwhelming resources to silence those who challenge the status quo, attacking not just the individual, but their family, future, and reputation. The case demonstrates how discrimination cases are rarely just about isolated incidents. What began as a slap on an airplane revealed an entire ecosystem of corporate policies, media manipulation, legal obstacles, and political connections designed to protect discriminatory practices. This interconnected system, explains why racial justice is so difficult to achieve through individual actions alone. Marcus's ultimate victory came not just from legal strategy, but from building solidarity. By connecting with others who had similar experiences and leveraging technology to document patterns of abuse, he transformed his personal struggle into a movement for collective change. His refusal to be silenced by money showed that true justice requires transparency, not just compensation. Perhaps most importantly, the story illustrates that change is possible, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. When enough people stand together and refuse to accept injustice, even the most entrenched systems can be forced to evolve. Progress may come at great personal cost, but as Marcus concluded, making the path easier for those who follow makes the sacrifice worthwhile. What discriminatory experiences have you witnessed or experienced while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. Has this tale of courage against systemic racism inspired you to speak up against injustice in your own life? If you believe in standing up for equality and dignity for all people, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience against discrimination. Remember, change happens when brave individuals refuse to accept the status quo. Thank you for listening to Marcus's journey, and may it empower you to recognize and challenge racism whenever you encounter it. Together, we can build a more just world where nobody has to fight so hard simply to be treated with respect.